It was just another Wednesday morning, the kind that felt like any other. The sun was still climbing in the sky, casting a soft golden light through the windows of the deli. The air inside was filled with the comforting scent of freshly baked bread, deli meats, and the faint hum of soft chatter. Customers came and went, oblivious to the normal hustle of the day. But then the door swung open. The bell above it chimed a little louder than usual, a soft metallic jingle that seemed to echo through the quiet shop. Heads turned, conversations paused, and the room suddenly felt charged with something unexpected. There, standing in the doorway, was none other than Keanu Reeves. No one had been expecting him. He wasn't a usual customer. In fact, the last time anyone had seen him here was months ago, and even then he was just another face in the crowd. But today, he was the reason the entire deli froze in disbelief. Keanu stood there, his signature calm smile spreading across his face. He wasn't dressed in his usual Hollywood attire, no flashy suits or sunglasses. Instead, he wore a simple, unassuming jacket and jeans, looking every bit the part of an ordinary guy trying to blend in. But the fact that he was Keanu Reeves was undeniable, and as he stepped further into the deli, it was clear that this was anything but an ordinary day. The staff stared for a moment, unsure whether they should approach him or let him do his own thing. But the ice broke when Keanu caught the eyes of one of the workers, a young man named Mark who couldn't help but laugh nervously. "Keanu," Mark said, his voice faltering slightly. Keanu chuckled, his voice smooth and warm. "Yeah, that's me." The room erupted into excited whispers, some of the customers fumbling for their phones to snap pictures, while others stood frozen, unsure of what to do next. "Is there something I can help you with?" the manager Linda asked, trying to maintain her professionalism despite the starstruck surprise. Keanu raised his hands in mock surrender. "I was just in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by. Haven't had a chance to pop in lately." There was an awkward pause as the staff looked between one another. Keanu was known for being humble and low-key, but the reality of having him right there just a few feet away was something none of them were prepared for. "Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from," Keanu suddenly said, looking into the camera of his phone. It was a light-hearted attempt to make everyone feel a bit more comfortable, like he was just another guy on the other side of the screen, talking to his fans. "Where's everyone watching from?" he asked, genuinely curious. "This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?" His words hung in the air for a moment, and for the first time that day, a sense of normalcy seemed to return to the room. The deli staff, still in disbelief, took a collective breath. Keanu was more than just a movie star. He was a real person, asking them questions and engaging in conversation like any regular customer. His presence was an invitation to connect, on a deeper level than anyone expected. As he made his way toward the counter, Keanu's gaze caught the eyes of Sarah, one of the younger workers. She was standing off to the side, organizing the sandwich station, but there was something about the way she looked that made Keanu pause. She didn't seem as starstruck as everyone else. In fact, she looked almost distant. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but there was something different about Sarah, something that caught his attention in a way that nothing else had. "Hey, Sarah," Keanu called, his voice breaking through the murmur of the deli. Sarah snapped her head up, startled to hear her name. Her eyes widened, and she quickly straightened her posture, but Keanu just gave her a friendly smile as though they were old friends catching up. "Hi, Keanu," Sarah said, her voice polite but a little stiff. She didn't seem quite as thrilled as everyone else, and Keanu noticed it. "Everything okay?" he asked, genuinely curious. Sarah hesitated for a moment before answering, her eyes flickering away from his. "Yeah, everything's fine," she replied, but there was something in her tone that made Keanu think otherwise. He couldn't quite place it, but he felt a nagging feeling that there was more to Sarah's story than she was letting on. As the deli continued to buzz with excitement, Keanu kept an eye on Sarah. He couldn't help but wonder what was going on beneath the surface. It was just a simple visit, a casual drop-in at a deli he owned, but somehow it felt like the beginning of something much bigger. Something that would change not only Sarah's life but maybe even his own. As the day went on, the excitement of Keanu's surprise visit began to settle. The customers who'd initially flocked to him for autographs and selfies started to trickle out, leaving the deli quieter than it had been in hours. The staff resumed their usual tasks, restocking shelves, cleaning counters, and managing the usual lunchtime rush. But the buzz still lingered in the air, like an invisible thread connecting everyone in the shop. Keanu had taken a seat at one of the corner booths, his presence now a little less intrusive, a little more casual. But something about Sarah's reaction earlier kept gnawing at him. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to her story, something that, if he could get past her walls, she might finally share. She wasn't like the others, who fawned over him or asked him the usual famous person questions. Sarah had been reserved, almost distant. After finishing his sandwich, Keanu stood up and made his way over to the counter. He grabbed his jacket from the coat rack, and as he passed by Sarah's station, he stopped. This time he wasn't asking for a sandwich or a drink. He was looking for something more. "Hey, Sarah," Keanu called again, his voice low enough not to draw too much attention. Sarah looked up, her expression neutral, but her eyes flickered with hesitation. She hadn't expected him to approach again. "Yeah?" she answered, wiping her hands on her apron. "Mind if we talk for a minute?" he asked, his tone gentle. "You seemed off earlier." Sarah swallowed hard. She'd expected a lot of things when Keanu walked into the deli, perhaps a rushed picture or a brief casual exchange, but not this. Not this feeling of being seen. Really seen. She glanced around, making sure no one was paying too much attention. Then, reluctantly, she nodded. "Sure, what's up?" Keanu motioned toward the back of the deli, away from the bustling kitchen and prying eyes. "How about over here?" The two of them walked to the quieter section by the storage room, where a stack of boxes and crates filled the space. It was still close enough to the main area to hear the soft clinks and chatter of the deli, but far enough away to offer some semblance of privacy. Keanu leaned against the wall casually, folding his arms. "I don't want to make you uncomfortable, but I couldn't help but notice you seemed, I don't know, a little distant earlier. Is everything okay?" Sarah shifted uncomfortably, the weight of his question pressing down on her. She wasn't used to people paying attention to her that way, not like this. She could feel herself starting to close up, the familiar wall rising. "It's nothing," she said quickly, looking away. "Really, I'm fine." Keanu smiled softly. "You know, you don't have to tell me if you don't want to, but it's rare that someone isn't caught up in the excitement of seeing me. Had I been doing this long enough to know when something's off?" Sarah paused, feeling a mix of unease and curiosity. She could feel the weight of his sincerity, the way he wasn't just trying to make small talk. It wasn't like the usual exchanges she had with customers or even her co-workers, where she was expected to smile and nod, keep things light and moving. Keanu wasn't asking her to act any different than she already was. For a moment, Sarah wrestled with herself. She was a professional. She didn't let emotions bleed through at work, and this conversation felt like it was crossing a line. But then again, there was something in Keanu's gaze that made her feel like it might be okay to open up. Just a little? "I don't want to make a big deal of it," she finally admitted, her voice quieter now. "But I guess, I don't know, sometimes I feel like I'm stuck, like everything I do is just routine. I wake up, I come here, I go home, and it's just a loop, day after day." Keanu nodded, his face softening with understanding. "That sounds tough. Are you feeling all right? Like emotionally, I mean." Sarah shifted uncomfortably, her fingers tugging at the hem of her apron. "I don't know. It's just, sometimes it feels like I'm invisible, you know? People walk by me every day and they don't really see me. They just see the worker behind the counter, the girl who makes their sandwich. It's like I'm nothing beyond that." Keanu's heart sank. He had heard that kind of thing before, more times than he could count. People trapped in a life they felt wasn't their own, suffocating under the weight of routines and expectations. But Sarah's words carried a kind of quiet sadness that hit him harder than usual. "You're not invisible," he said, his voice firm but kind. "I see you, Sarah. You've got this whole world inside you, and you're doing a hell of a lot more than just making sandwiches." She looked up, startled. by his words. "You really think so?" Keanu smiled, his expression softening. "I know so. I can tell you've got a lot of heart, and it's not easy, you know, being in a job where it feels like no one really notices. But that doesn't mean you don't matter. You matter, more than you realize." Sarah's throat tightened, her eyes welling with emotion she hadn't expected to feel. She quickly wiped her eyes, embarrassed, and forced a smile. "Thanks, Keanu," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "That means a lot." Keanu gave her a nod of encouragement. "Any time. And hey, if you ever want to talk more, I'm here. I'm just a guy who happens to know what it's like to feel, well, like no one's really seeing you." As Sarah watched him walk back toward the front of the deli, she couldn't help but feel a small flicker of hope. Maybe there was more to life than just routines and invisible walls. Maybe, just maybe, things could change. Little did she know, this conversation was only the beginning of something bigger, something that would eventually change not just her life, but Keanu's as well. The next few days passed in a blur for Sarah. The deli became a whirlwind of activity again, with the usual lunchtime rush, the laughter of regular customers, and the hum of sandwiches being assembled and served. Yet despite the typical chaos of her work life, she couldn't shake the conversation she'd had with Keanu. It was as if his words had planted a seed in her mind, one that was slowly taking root, pushing through the monotony of her everyday existence. She found herself questioning everything. Was she really invisible? Or was she simply choosing to remain in the background, afraid to step out and be seen? Keanu had made it seem so simple. You matter. That simple phrase kept replaying in her mind, but it felt so foreign. Her whole life had been about blending in, keeping her head down and moving through the days without drawing attention to herself. Being noticed, really noticed, felt like something that belonged to other people, people who were more important, more visible than someone like her. On Friday, just a few days after Keanu's visit, Sarah arrived at work early, her mind still, heavy with thoughts. She wasn't sure what she was expecting to happen, but she knew one thing for sure: she couldn't continue feeling stuck. She couldn't keep living like she was just a background character in her own life. When she walked into the deli, Linda, the manager, was already behind the counter arranging the morning specials. Linda greeted her with a smile. "Hey Sarah, how's it going today? You look a little different. Everything okay?" Sarah paused, meeting Linda's eyes. She hadn't realized it, but she did feel different. Something had shifted inside her. It wasn't that she felt drastically different, just more awake, more present. "I'm good," Sarah said, forcing a smile. "So just thinking, I guess." Linda raised an eyebrow. "About what?" Sarah hesitated. She wasn't sure how to explain what had happened, the way her thoughts had suddenly changed, the way Keanu's simple words had made her see things in a new light. But something in her told her she had to start somewhere. So she took a deep breath and said, "About making a change. In my life, you know. I've been stuck in the same routine for so long. I think it's time to start living differently." Linda looked at her, surprise flickering in her eyes. "Well, that sounds exciting. What kind of change?" Sarah shrugged, not fully knowing what she meant herself. "I don't know yet, but maybe it's time to stop hiding, to actually do something for me. You know, take a chance." Linda grinned. "I think that's great, Sarah. You've got a lot of potential, don't forget that." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Linda had never said anything like that to her before. The words felt like a small affirmation, as though she were being given permission to move forward. It felt good, too. Good. And it made her realize how much she'd been holding herself back all these years. As the morning wore on, Sarah's thoughts continued to spin, but they weren't as heavy anymore. She felt like she could breathe a little easier. And maybe, just maybe, there was more waiting for her than just this job. But as the day dragged on, Sarah couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that her decision to change wouldn't be as easy as she hoped. Later that afternoon, as Sarah was working behind the counter, she saw something out of the corner of her eye. It was Keanu again, walking through the front door like it was the most normal thing in the world. Sarah's heart skipped. She hadn't expected to see him again so soon. The place was quieter than before, with fewer customers around, but it was still enough to make Sarah feel nervous. After all, their last conversation had been deep, something personal. She wasn't sure if she was ready to open up again. But Keanu, ever the unassuming figure, smiled at her as he approached. "Hey, Sarah," he said, his voice warm. "I've been thinking about you." Sarah blinked, startled. "You have?" He nodded, giving her an easy smile. "Yeah, I wanted to check in. How have you been?" Sarah hesitated for a moment. She wasn't sure if she was ready to tell him how his words had affected her, how they had sparked something inside of her, but something about his presence made her feel safe. Maybe it was the fact that he'd been so genuine the first time they spoke. Maybe it was because he didn't seem like the typical celebrity who was just passing through. He genuinely cared, and she could feel it. "I've been thinking a lot," she admitted, "about what you said about feeling invisible." Keanu raised an eyebrow. "And?" "And I think you were right," Sarah said, her voice soft. "I've been stuck, but I'm trying to figure out how to get out of it." Keanu smiled, a look of understanding crossing his features. "You're on the right track, but it's not about making some grand overnight change. It's about little steps. Each one matters, and every day is a chance to do something different, something for you." Sarah smiled back, her heart swelling with gratitude. He made it sound so simple, so achievable, and for the first time in a long time she believed it. She could change. She was changing. "You really think I can do it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know you can," Keanu said, his gaze steady and reassuring. "The question is, when will you start?" And that question hit Sarah harder than anything else. When would she start? When would she stop letting fear and doubt hold her back? She didn't know the answer, but for the first time she felt like she had the strength to begin. As Keanu left the deli that afternoon, waving goodbye to the staff, Sarah stood there watching him go. It wasn't just his words that had given her the push she needed. It was the way he had seen her, the way he had made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she mattered. And with that small seed of belief, Sarah knew her journey was just beginning. She wasn't invisible anymore, and she wasn't going to hide anymore either. The world was waiting, and she was ready to step into it. The next few weeks felt like a whirlwind for Sarah. Every day she woke up with a different mindset, a kind of quiet determination to make small changes, to step out of the shadows and be a little more present in her own life. Keanu's words echoed in her head every morning, like a gentle reminder that she didn't have to stay stuck. She could move forward, even if it was just one small step at a time. She started taking on new tasks at the deli. Instead of hiding, in the back, avoiding eye contact with customers, she began to engage more, offering a smile, striking up casual conversations, learning more about the regulars who came in. At first it was awkward, but slowly she began to enjoy it. Each interaction felt like a small victory, a step closer to shaking off the invisible chains that had kept her bound for so long. But the changes weren't confined to just her work. Sarah began to take more interest in her personal life too. She reconnected with old friends she hadn't spoken to in months, started attending yoga classes she'd always been too self-conscious to try, and even began picking up a few new hobbies, things she had put off for years because she'd been too afraid to step outside her comfort zone. It wasn't about making huge leaps. It was about embracing what had once felt impossible. One afternoon, as she was finishing up her shift, Linda called her over to the counter. "Sarah, I need to talk to you for a second," she said, her tone a little more serious than usual. Sarah walked over, a little surprised. "What's up?" "I've been noticing something," Linda began, looking at her with a thoughtful expression. "You've been different lately, and I have to say it's been great to see you so alive. You're more engaged with the customers, and honestly I can see that you're growing into something more than just the girl who makes sandwiches. I've got to ask, have you thought about taking on more responsibilities here?" Sarah blinked, taken aback by the question. More responsibilities. She hadn't expected that. She'd only been focusing on her own personal growth and taking things step by step. But this felt like an invitation, an opportunity to go even further. I hadn't really thought about it," Sarah admitted, feeling a rush of excitement and nervousness all at once. What do you mean by more responsibilities? Linda leaned in, her voice lower now as she spoke. I'm talking about potentially taking on a managerial position. We've been needing someone to help with scheduling and training the new staff. I've noticed how much you've grown, Sarah. You've got the skills, and honestly, I think you'd be a great fit. Sarah's heart raced. This was it. The chance she didn't know she was waiting for. The chance to step up, to take control of something bigger than herself. But with it came a new set of challenges. The responsibilities, the expectations. Could she really do it? I don't know, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I mean, I'm flattered that you think I could handle it. But it feels like such a big step. Linda gave her a reassuring smile. It's a big step, yes, but I have no doubt you can handle it. You've already proven that you're capable of more than you realized. You just need to believe in yourself. A little more. And trust that you can grow into this role just like you've been growing in other areas of your life. Sarah swallowed, her mind racing. It was a huge decision, and she wasn't sure she was ready. But something inside her was telling her to take the leap. For once, the fear didn't feel as suffocating. For once, the voice inside her wasn't telling her she was unqualified or incapable. It was telling her she had what it took. I'll do it, Sarah said finally, the words surprising even herself. Linda's eyes lit up. That's great. I knew you had it in you. I'll get the ball rolling on the transition. You'll do great, Sarah. As Sarah left work that day, her heart was racing. She was excited, nervous, overwhelmed, but above all, she felt alive. She had taken another step forward, one she never would have thought possible before. But now it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Over the following weeks, Sarah threw herself into her new role. She found herself managing the schedule, training new employees, and even creating new systems to streamline the deli's operations. There were challenges, of course, moments of doubt, moments when she felt out of her depth. But every time she hit a wall, she found a way to push through. And the more she did, the more her confidence grew. One day, while she was going over some paperwork in the back office, she heard a familiar voice from the front of the deli. Hey, Sarah, got a minute? It was Keanu again. He'd been stopping by every few weeks, checking in with her and catching up on life. This time he was holding a sandwich wrapped in deli paper, his usual casual smile on his face. I've got all the time in the world, Sarah said, standing up to greet him. Keanu grinned as he walked toward the counter. How's the new role going? You look like you've got everything under control, Sarah chuckled, shaking her head. I don't know about that, but I'm figuring it out. It's been a challenge, but in a good way. I'm proud of you, Keanu said, his tone sincere. You've come a long way since we first talked. It's amazing to see how much you've grown. Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest. Hearing those words from him, someone she respected and admired, meant more than she could express. Thank you, Keanu. I don't think I could have done it without that push you gave me. Keanu smiled, then handed her the sandwich. Well, I'm glad I could help, but you're the one who did the work, and that's something no one can take away from you. As she took the sandwich from him, Sarah realized something. The path she had started on wasn't about a single life-altering moment. It was about making those small, quiet choices every day. It was about taking the leap when the opportunity came, even when fear threatened to hold her back. And as she looked around the deli, her deli now, with all the changes she had made, she knew that this was just the beginning. There were more steps to take, more growth to come. But for the first time in her life, she was ready for whatever came next. Sarah's first few weeks in her new managerial role were a whirlwind. The tasks that seemed so overwhelming at first gradually became more manageable, and the uncertainty that had once plagued her began to fade. She discovered new strengths she didn't know she had, from solving customer complaints with grace to keeping track of inventory with efficiency. But with every new skill she acquired, a new challenge arose. There were days when she doubted herself, when the weight of responsibility felt too much. And yet, each time she was ready to give up, something inside her urged her to keep going. One evening, after the deli had closed for the day and the last customer had left, Sarah sat down at the counter, reviewing the budget reports. She was still getting the hang of the financial side of things, but she had a sinking feeling that something wasn't adding up. The numbers weren't quite right, and she couldn't figure out where the discrepancy was coming from. Frustration gnawed at her as she flipped through the papers, trying to make sense of the mess. The noise of the outside world seemed to fade as she lost herself in the figures. Her mind raced, but every attempt to find the problem only made her more confused. Everything. Okay? Sarah looked up, startled to see Linda standing in the doorway of the back office, her arms crossed. She hadn't heard Linda come in. Yeah, I think so, Sarah replied, but she couldn't hide the concern in her voice. I'm just working. Through the budget. I found a discrepancy, but I can't seem to figure out where it's coming from. Linda walked over to the counter, glancing at the papers Sarah was staring at. Want me to take a look? Sarah hesitated. She didn't want to admit that she was struggling. She'd been so determined to prove herself capable of handling everything on her own. But in that moment, she realized that she couldn't do it all. She needed help. Yeah, actually, I'd really appreciate it, Sarah said, her voice softening. Linda smiled kindly, sitting down next to her. We all have moments where we need a little guidance. You're doing great, Sarah. Just don't forget to lean on others when you need to. Together, they spent the next hour combing through the reports, and Linda patiently walked Sarah through the process of identifying the issue. It turned out there was a small error in the inventory log, one that had thrown off the numbers. Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her as the problem was finally solved. Thank you, Linda, Sarah said gratefully. I was really stuck there for a minute. No problem, Linda replied with a wink. I've been doing this long enough to know that things don't always go as planned, but you're learning fast. I'm proud of you. As Sarah headed home that evening, she couldn't help but reflect on how far she'd come. There were still moments of uncertainty, moments where she questioned whether she was cut out for this role, but each time she faced a challenge, she found a way through it. And the more she relied on others, the more she realized that asking for help didn't make her weak. It made her stronger. It meant she was willing to grow, to learn, and to embrace the unknown. The following week, Sarah received a call that would change everything. It was late in the afternoon, and she was on the floor chatting with some customers as she wrapped up their sandwiches. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket, and she excused herself to check it. The caller ID was unfamiliar, but she picked up. Anyway, hello, this is Sarah. Hi, is this Sarah from the Deli? The voice on the other end asked. Yes, that's me. How can I help you? This is Allison from the local news station, the voice continued. We've been following your story, and we'd love to do a segment on you. We think your journey from worker to manager is inspiring, and we'd like to feature you in an upcoming piece about local entrepreneurs who are making a difference. Sarah's heart skipped. She had never expected anything like this. A news segment about her? She was just a deli manager. It felt surreal, almost like she was the subject of someone else's story. That's wow, Sarah stammered. I don't really know what to say. Allison laughed. You don't have to say anything yet. We just wanted to reach out and see if you'd be interested. We'd love to come in for an interview and show how your story could inspire others. Let us know if you're open to it. Sarah stood frozen for a moment, the weight of the offer sinking in. She had never considered the possibility of being in the spotlight, never thought her small life would be of any interest to anyone outside of her tight-knit community. But now there it was, an opportunity to share her story, to be seen in a way she never had been before. After a long pause, Sarah took a deep breath. She could feel the familiar rush of doubt creeping in. Was she really ready for this? To be on television? To be seen by people outside of her world? But then she thought back to everything she had learned so far, the moments when she'd pushed through her fear, when she'd taken a chance on herself. I'm in, Sarah said finally, her voice steady. I'd love to do it. Allison's voice was full of excitement. That's amazing. We'll send a crew over in the next few days to set everything up. We'll be in touch to finalize the details. Thank you so much for agreeing to this. As Sarah hung up the phone, her mind raced. The excitement was there, but so was a new layer of fear. Being on TV meant she would be out in the open, vulnerable and exposed. But even as the nerves settled in, Sarah knew she had made the right choice. This was the next step. It was another chance to face the unknown, to move forward, even if it felt terrifying. The next few days were a blur of preparations. Sarah spent hours perfecting her speech, making sure she could speak with clarity and confidence. She even went over her wardrobe a dozen times, wanting to make sure she looked as professional as possible. But the closer the interview came, the more she realized it wasn't about looking perfect. It was about being real. When the crew finally arrived at the deli, it felt like the entire world had shifted. Lights were set up, cameras positioned, and Sarah found herself standing at the center of it all, ready to share her story. Keanu's words echoed in her mind once again. You matter. This was her moment, the one she had worked toward without even realizing it. And as the first question was asked, Sarah took a deep breath and smiled. This was her time. She was no longer invisible. She was ready to be seen. The days leading up to Sarah's interview felt like a blur. Her thoughts were a whirlwind of excitement, fear, and self-doubt, all blending together as she prepared for the interview. The closer it came, the more she realized how far she had come from the shy, uncertain girl who had once hidden in the back of the deli. This was the next step. She could feel it in her bones. On the morning of the interview, Sarah woke up early, too excited to sleep in. The light from the sun streamed through the window, and for the first time in a while she felt ready. She took her time getting dressed, carefully choosing an outfit that was both professional and comfortable, a reflection of how far she'd come, confident, but still true to who she was. When she arrived at the deli, the crew was already setting up. They had cameras mounted on tripods, sound equipment, and a few crew members running around making sure everything was perfect. It felt surreal. Just a few weeks ago, she never would have imagined herself in this position, but now there was no turning back. She had agreed to do this, and she was determined to do it right. Keanu was there, of course, his familiar face offering her a calming presence amidst the whirlwind of activity. He had been a steady source of encouragement throughout her entire journey, and today was no different. You ready for this? Keanu asked as he approached her, giving her a warm smile. Sarah smiled back, though there was a hint of nervousness in her eyes. I think so. I mean, I've never done anything like this before. Keanu chuckled softly. It's okay to be nervous. Just remember, it's your story. People want to hear that. They want to see the real you. His words were like a wave of reassurance. For a moment, the nerves eased, and she felt like she could do this. She wasn't pretending to be someone else. She wasn't trying to be perfect. She was just going to be herself. As the crew finished setting up, Sarah was led to the small corner of the deli that had been transformed into a makeshift interview set. The cameras were pointed at her, and the bright lights seemed to make everything feel more intense. Allison, the journalist from the news station, approached her with a warm smile. "Are you ready?" Allison asked, her tone calm and reassuring. Sarah nodded, her hands a little clammy, but she was determined not to let fear control her. "I'm ready." The interview began with a few warm-up questions about Sarah's role at the deli and how she had started working there. She spoke about her journey, the challenges she had faced, and the small moments of growth that had led her to where she was now. She talked about her struggles with self-doubt and how step by step she had learned to believe in herself. As the conversation continued, Sarah found herself growing more comfortable. The lights, the cameras, even the crew moving around in the background, all seemed to fade away as she opened up about her story. She talked about the importance of community, how the people at the deli had become more than just customers. They had become friends, people who had supported her even when she didn't believe in herself. She told them about the moment Keanu had visited the deli and shared his words with her. She spoke of how that conversation had changed everything for her. "I think what really made a difference for me was realizing that I wasn't alone," Sarah said, looking directly into the camera. "I had people around me who believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself. That's what pushed me to keep going. And honestly, that's why I'm here today." As she spoke, Sarah felt something shift inside her. She wasn't just telling her story for the sake of an interview. She was telling it because she was proud of how far she had come. She had learned to embrace her growth, to take ownership of her journey. After the interview, the crew packed up their equipment, and the noise and bustle of the deli returned to its usual rhythm. But something inside Sarah had changed. She had taken a step into the light, and it felt different from anything she had ever done before. As the day came to an end, Sarah stood at the counter, watching the usual group of customers chatting and enjoying their meals. It was the kind of scene she had always known, but now it felt different. She felt more connected, more present. Keanu came by one last time before he left for the day. "You did great, Sarah. Seriously. You were amazing in that interview." Sarah smiled, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. "Thank you, Keanu. I couldn't have done it without your support." Keanu gave her a knowing look. "You did all the work. I just pointed you in the right direction." As she watched him leave, Sarah took a moment to reflect on everything that had happened. Her story had been told, and now she had a new sense of purpose. It wasn't just about the deli or the role she had taken on. It was about her life, the way she had learned to embrace each challenge, each moment of growth, no matter how small. And, for the first time in a long time, Sarah knew without a doubt that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The segment aired a few days later. Sarah had spent the day anxiously watching the clock, waiting for the time when the story would come on. When it finally did, she was surprised by how proud she felt watching herself on the screen. She looked calm, confident, and most of all, real. The phone began to ring with messages from friends and family, all of them congratulating her and telling her how proud they were. But what really struck her were the messages from people she didn't know, people who had seen the segment and were inspired by her story. One message stood out above the rest. "I've been stuck in my life for so long, but your story gave me hope. Thank you for showing me that it's never too late to start over." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes as she read the message. It wasn't about the recognition or the spotlight. It was about making a difference, even in the smallest of ways. She had shared her journey, and in doing so she had touched someone else's life. For the first time, Sarah didn't feel invisible anymore. She felt seen, not just by the world, but by herself. And that was the most powerful feeling of all. She smiled, a quiet sense of pride settling over her. The journey wasn't over yet, but she knew one thing for sure. She was ready for whatever came next. A few weeks passed since Sarah's interview aired, and life at the deli had returned to its usual rhythm. But everything had changed. Not only was Sarah more confident in her role as manager, but she began to notice small shifts in the people around her, her co-workers, customers, and even herself. The impact of her story, the one she had once doubted was worth sharing, rippled out far beyond what she could have imagined. One morning, Sarah arrived at the deli early, just as the first rays of sunlight began to spill through the windows. She had gotten into the habit of coming in before the rush, using the quiet time to reflect and organize her thoughts. But today was different. Today, the deli was filled with energy, and not just because of the bustling preparations. Today, Sarah was going to make an important decision, one that she had been thinking about for a while now. As she stepped behind the counter, she noticed Linda, one of her most dedicated employees, flipping through a notebook with a focused expression. Linda had been with the deli for years, and in that time she had become more than just a co-worker. She had become Sarah's right hand. "Hey, Linda," Sarah called out, walking over to her. "What's got you so deep in thought?" Linda looked up, a smile creeping onto her face. "Oh, hey, Sarah. I was just brainstorming a few ideas for some new menu items. I was thinking we could try a vegetarian sandwich special this month. You know, something light and fresh for spring." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "That sounds interesting. What do you have in mind?" Before Linda could respond, the bell above the door rang, signaling a customer entering. Sarah turned to see a familiar face, one she hadn't seen in a few weeks. It was Grace, one of the regulars who had always been a bit of a loner. She was a quiet woman, often sitting by herself in the corner, sipping her coffee and reading a book. Grace had been a fixture at the deli for as long as Sarah could remember, but she had never really opened up to anyone. "Good morning, Grace." Sarah greeted warmly as the woman made her way to the counter. Grace smiled faintly, her eyes warm but tired. "Morning, Sarah. Just the usual, please." As Sarah prepared Grace's order, she felt an odd tug of curiosity. There was something different about the way Grace carried herself today, something that wasn't quite right. Once Sarah handed her the sandwich and coffee, Grace lingered, hesitating before speaking. "Sarah," she began softly, "I saw your interview on TV. I have to admit I wasn't sure what to think at first, but, well, it really resonated with me. I've been thinking a lot about my own life lately." Sarah glanced up at her, surprised. "Oh, wow, I didn't realize you saw it." Grace gave a small nod. "I did. And I've been stuck in a job for years, always thinking it's too late to change, too late to pursue what I really want. But hearing you talk about your journey, it made me realize I've been holding myself back. I've always been too scared to take the leap." Sarah felt a sudden rush of warmth in her chest. She didn't know what to say at first. This wasn't the kind of conversation she had ever expected to have over a sandwich order. But there it was. Her story had sparked something in someone. "Hells, that's amazing to hear, Grace," Sarah said, a smile tugging at her lips. "You know, it's never too late. You have a lot more control over your life than you think. I mean, look at me. I never imagined I'd be managing this place, but here I am. Taking that first step is the hardest part, but it's also the most important." Grace's eyes brightened slightly, and she nodded. "You're right. I've been too comfortable in my routine, too afraid to make a change. But maybe it's time for me to do something different. Maybe it's time to start that art class I've been talking about for years. Or even, who knows, pursue a new career." Sarah could hardly contain her excitement for Grace. It was clear that something had clicked for her, that a seed of possibility had been planted. "That sounds amazing," Sarah said encouragingly. "You deserve to pursue whatever makes you happy. And don't wait for the perfect time. Sometimes you just have to make the time." Grace smiled, her face lighting up in a way Sarah hadn't seen before. "Thank you, Sarah. Really. Your story has given me the push I needed. I'm going to look into that class this weekend." As Grace turned to leave, Sarah watched her go, her heart swelling with pride. It wasn't just about sandwiches and coffee anymore. It was about something more, something deeper. She had shared her story, and now it was helping others find their own way. Later that day, Sarah had a meeting with her staff, as she often did. But this meeting was different. She could feel the energy in the room, the shift that had occurred ever since the interview aired. Her team seemed more motivated, more connected. There was a sense of purpose among them, a collective understanding that they were part of something bigger than just serving food. "All right, everyone," Sarah began, standing in front of the group. "I know we've all been working hard, and I want to thank you for that. But I think it's time we push ourselves even further. We've got the foundation in place. We know what we're doing. But now it's time to get creative. Linda, I love your idea for the vegetarian sandwich special, and I think we should go even further. How about a community event? We could do something that celebrates local talent, something that brings people together. Maybe even a cooking class or an art show right here in the deli." The team seemed to light up at the suggestion. "That's a great idea," Linda exclaimed. "We could make it a weekly thing, get people involved in the creative process, and we could feature local artists or musicians." Sarah nodded. "Exactly. This is more than just a business for me. It's about creating a space where people feel seen, heard and valued, and it starts with us, with all of us." As the meeting continued, ideas flowed freely, and Sarah couldn't help but feel proud of how far they had come. The deli had become more than just a place for sandwiches and coffee. It had become a gathering place for the community, a reflection of the values Sarah had instilled since taking over as manager. Later that afternoon, Sarah went outside to take a quick break. The warm sun bathed her in a peaceful glow as she stood in the parking lot, her thoughts drifting. The journey had been hard, and at times she had doubted herself, but now with each passing day, she could see the fruits of her labor. Not just in the success of the business, but in the way it had touched people's lives. People like Grace, who had found the courage to take the first step toward a new beginning. Sarah's heart swelled with gratitude as she watched the world continue to spin around her. She had come so far. She was no longer the girl who hid in the shadows. She was the woman who had taken the leap, who had embraced the unknown, and who was now helping others do the same. And she knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. Phone rang again later that afternoon, and when Sarah picked it up, she was greeted with the familiar voice of Alison, the journalist. "Hi, Sarah. I just wanted to check in and see how things were going since the interview aired. We've gotten so much positive feedback, and people have really connected with your story." Sarah smiled, feeling the warmth of the conversation. "It's been incredible. Honestly, I'm still processing it all, but it's amazing to see the impact it's had on others." "I'm so glad to hear that," Alison said. "You've inspired so many people, Sarah, and I have to say, you're doing more than just managing a deli. You're building something special here, something that goes beyond food. Keep doing what you're doing." Sarah's heart fluttered with gratitude as she took in Alison's words. The path ahead was uncertain, yes, but it was hers to walk, and no matter what happened, she would continue to move forward, one step at a time. The deli's success continued to soar, but with success came its own set of challenges. Sarah had grown accustomed to the daily grind of managing the business and maintaining the energy of the staff, but now, with the spotlight on the deli, the pressures were more intense than ever. The community was buzzing with excitement over the new events, the deli's unique specials, and Sarah's story of transformation. But with each new customer that walked through the door, there came expectations. As the weeks passed, Sarah found herself juggling more than she ever had before. She had to deal with not only the logistics of running the deli, but also the increasing number of interviews, media appearances, and sponsorship opportunities that seemed to flood her inbox daily. It was an exciting time, yes, but it was also overwhelming. Sarah had always thrived in the simplicity of the work, the rhythm of the kitchen, the chatter of customers, the steady pace of daily life. But now, with everything growing, she felt stretched thin. One particularly stressful afternoon, Sarah was running from one end of the deli to the other, making sure everything was running smoothly. The event they had planned for the following weekend was quickly approaching, and there was so much to do. She had to confirm catering, finalize the schedule for local artists, and double-check the decorations and arrangements. She was feeling the pressure. Just as she was about to send a text to Linda, asking if she could stay late to help with some last-minute preparations, a familiar face appeared at the counter. "Hey, Sarah," Keanu said, his warm smile cutting through the tension in the room. "How's everything going? You look a little, well, stressed." Sarah laughed a little, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You could say that. There's just so much to manage right now. The event, the interviews, trying to keep everything running smoothly. It's a lot." Keanu leaned against the counter, studying her. "I can tell. But you don't have to do it all on your own." Sarah paused, taking in his words. She had always been someone who believed in handling things herself, even if it meant taking on too much. She didn't want to let anyone down, especially not the people who had supported her through all of this. "I don't want to burden anyone else," Sarah admitted, her voice softer than usual. "Everyone's working so hard already. I don't want to seem like I can't handle things." Keanu raised an eyebrow. "Sarah, you've come a long way, and it's okay to lean on people. It's part of growing. People want to help. They admire what you've built here, and they want to be a part of it." It was a reminder that Sarah needed to hear, but it didn't make the pressure go away. She had built something beautiful at the deli, but now she had to manage not only the business itself, but also the expectations of her team, the community, and the media. And at the same time, she was still learning how to lead and to trust herself. That evening, after closing time, Sarah sat alone in the office, her head buried in papers and her computer screen. The to-do list felt endless. She could feel the weight of it all pressing down on her. There was an unexpected knock at the door. "Sarah?" Linda's voice came from the other side. "Do you have a second?" "Of course, come on in." Linda stepped inside, holding a small notebook in her hands. She had a thoughtful expression on her face, and for a moment Sarah felt guilty for not having the time to focus on the business as much as she used to. "I've been thinking about everything you're juggling right now," Linda began, sitting down across from Sarah. "And I want to help. I know you're used to doing everything yourself, but we're a team here. I want you to know you don't have to carry all of this alone." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. Linda had been by her side through thick and thin, but this moment, where Linda took the initiative to help in such a meaningful way, struck her deeply. "Thank you, Linda. I know I've been trying to do too much. I didn't want to let anyone down." "You won't," Linda replied with a soft smile. "You've already done more than anyone could have imagined. But now it's about balancing everything, right? So let's figure out how we can share the load." As Linda started brainstorming ideas for how to better divide the responsibilities, Sarah felt a sense of relief wash over her. She had spent so much time trying to be everything for everyone, but she was realizing that being a leader meant knowing when to trust others and delegate. The following weeks were a turning point. Sarah worked closely with Linda to reorganize the deli's management structure, assigning more tasks to the team so that Sarah wouldn't be overwhelmed. They also brought in a few new part-time staff members to help with events and day-to-day operations. Slowly but surely, Sarah was learning to accept help without feeling like she was losing control, and with each step, her confidence grew. But just when Sarah thought things were finally settling into a manageable rhythm, an unexpected hurdle appeared. The evening before the big community event, Sarah received a call from the local media outlet that had been helping promote the event. "Hi, Sarah. I'm afraid we've just run into an issue," the voice on the other end said. "The art gallery that was supposed to showcase their work at tomorrow's event has backed out. They're citing logistical issues and won't be able to attend." Sarah's stomach dropped. The event was supposed to highlight local artists and musicians, but now, with less than 24 hours to go, one of their key partners had dropped out. I don't know what we're going to do," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "We've been promoting this event for weeks. People are expecting something really special." The person on the other end of the phone offered some suggestions, but nothing seemed to solve the problem. Sarah sat there for a moment, feeling paralyzed by the situation. She had worked so hard to make this event something that brought the community together, and now it was at risk of falling apart. After the call ended, Sarah felt a deep wave of frustration. It was a moment that could have easily caused her to give up, to let the stress win. But instead, something shifted in her. She had fought too hard to let this moment ruin everything. The next morning, as she arrived at the deli early to prepare for the event, Sarah made a decision. They wouldn't let this setback define them. She called Linda and Keanu, and together they quickly devised a plan to fill the gap left by the art gallery. They reached out to local artists and vendors, asking if they could bring in their works for the event. It wasn't ideal, but Sarah realized something. The deli wasn't just about the food or the specials. It was about the community. And no matter what happened, they could still make the event meaningful. As the event kicked off later that evening, Sarah stood at the front of the deli, looking around at the lively scene. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. People were laughing, talking and sharing in the experience, and that was enough. Sarah had learned an important lesson. Perfection wasn't the goal. What mattered was showing up, being present and embracing the imperfect moments that made life meaningful. The next morning, as the final guests filtered out of the event, Sarah stood in the middle of the deli, looking around at the chaos, the leftover decorations, the empty plates, the lingering buzz of excitement in the air. The event had been a success despite the setbacks, and for the first time Sarah felt a deep sense of peace. She had overcome yet another challenge, and she had done it with grace, surrounded by a team that believed in her and the community that supported her. Whatever came next, Sarah knew she was ready. The weeks following the community event felt like a whirlwind of emotions. The deli's popularity had reached new heights, and Sarah could hardly believe how far they had come since that first day she took over as manager. The event had been a resounding success, even with the last-minute challenges, and the feedback from the community was overwhelmingly positive. People had shown up not only for the food, but for the experience, the sense of togetherness that Sarah had worked so hard to create. Still, the pressure remained. The deli had become a landmark in town, and with that came increased attention from the media, as well as a surge in customer traffic. Sarah found herself balancing more than ever before. There were days when the stress felt unbearable, but she had learned how to navigate it. Through all the uncertainty and the hard work, she had found a strength she never knew she had. One particularly busy afternoon, Sarah was overseeing the lunch rush when she noticed a familiar face sitting by the window. It was Keanu. He was alone, sipping a coffee and watching the bustling scene with a calm expression. She couldn't help but smile. They hadn't had much time to catch up lately, and seeing him here, as always, brought a sense of comfort. He had become more than just the man who had been there at the Deli's grand reopening. Keanu had become a friend, someone who understood her journey and supported her through the highs and lows. After finishing a quick task, Sarah walked over to his table. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, her tone playful. Keanu looked up and grinned. "Not at all. I was just thinking about how much I've missed this place. It feels like it's been ages since we sat down for a quiet chat." Sarah slid into the seat across from him, her mind momentarily drifting from the frenzy of the Deli. "Yeah, it's been a bit hectic lately, but I can't complain. I'm finally starting to feel like I'm getting a handle on things." Keanu nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I can see that. You've built something really special here, Sarah. But don't forget, even the strongest leaders need to take a break every once in a while. You can't pour from an empty cup." Sarah sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I know, I've been thinking about that a lot lately. It's hard, though, when there's so much to do. It feels like I always have to be on my game." Keanu leaned back in his chair, giving her a knowing look. "You're not alone in this, and there's no shame in asking for help when you need it." She glanced at him, grateful for his words. There was a wisdom in Keanu that she had always admired. His ability to be present, to focus on what mattered most, had been a grounding force in her life since they met. "I guess I'm still learning how to trust others with the vision I've built," Sarah admitted, her voice softer than usual. Keanu's smile was gentle. "Trust is a hard thing, especially when you've put your heart and soul into something. But that's part of growth, isn't it? Learning to let go of control and trust that those around you want to see you succeed too." Sarah considered his words for a long moment. She knew he was right. Over the past few months, she had worked tirelessly to ensure that the Deli was everything she had dreamed of. But in doing so, she had also taken on more than she could handle. She had started to realize that growth wasn't just about expanding the business. It was about allowing herself to grow as a person, to learn when to step back, and to trust in the people who had stood by her side. "I guess it's time to make some changes," she said, her voice quiet but determined. "I've been running at full speed for so long that I haven't taken a moment to reflect on what I really need. Maybe I do need a break, even if it's just a few hours here and there. I can't keep going like this forever." Keanu nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. "It's okay to take a step back, Sarah. The Deli will still be here when you come back. And when you're ready, you can come back stronger than ever." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of the bell above the door jingling as a new customer walked in. Sarah stood up quickly, her manager instincts kicking in. "I better get back to work," she said, giving Keanu a smile. "But thank you for everything." "You got it," Keanu said with a wink. "Just remember, you don't have to do it all alone." As Sarah made her way back to the counter, she felt a new sense of clarity wash over her. The Deli wasn't just her passion, it was a reflection of who she had become. It was a place where dreams had come true, where hard work had paid off, and where she had found her own strength. But Sarah realized that the next step in her journey wasn't about pushing herself harder. It was about allowing herself to breathe, to enjoy the fruits of her labor, and to trust in the team she had built. That evening, as she closed up the Deli and walked out into the cool night air, Sarah paused for a moment, looking up at the starry sky. Everything had changed. She had changed. And the Deli, too, had evolved into something more than just a business. It was a symbol of growth, of resilience, and of community. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew that whatever came next, she was ready. And more than anything, she knew that the true measure of success wasn't in the size of the business or the number of customers. It was in the relationships she had built, the lives she had touched, and the lessons she had learned along the way. As Sarah walked home that night, her heart was light and her mind was at peace. It had been a long journey, filled with unexpected twists and turns. But in the end, it had been the kind of story she was proud to tell. And as for the deli, it was more than just a place to get a meal. It had become a symbol of hope, of second chances, and of the power of community. And that, Sarah knew, was just the beginning.